Yeah, I already apologized to Alan about stealing his webpage to use as my title slide.
I'm sure he didn't mind.
I mean, talking about water at H2O, I mean, you can't do that. So, here's what I had in mind for tonight. And Ryan and I talked a little bit about this, and this is kind of where I ended up here. I've got some sections here so you know what's coming, and that way, if you have a question, it might not be in exactly the order you expected it, but it may be answered. So I'm going to first talk about why even bother with this, and then we're going to do a little Chemistry 99. Okay? It's not even worthy of a 101, it's only 99. And then we'll do some basic brewing chemistry. We'll talk about how's your water. And then I'll talk about some simple approaches and then how to go beyond that. And then I'm going to spend some time actually going through some of the tools that I've used. The one that is my favorite, I'll tell you right now, you'll hear it again later, is that Brew and Water spreadsheet by Martin Brungard. And then look at Beersmith. Palmer's Nomograph, that was in How to Brew. I don't know if anybody messed with that. I'll show you how I used to use that, but I don't anymore. And then also look at Palmer's spreadsheet, which I still use, but not for the water chemistry part. So I'll show you that. Then I've got some further study, a sheet of further study things, which are my current favorites to look at the water topic. And then I'm going to end with actual music, some sound advice on what to do with your water chemistry. So let me ask, first of all, how many of you do mess around with your water chemistry? I know you do. Okay.
Is that gypsum count?
Gypsum counts. Yeah, 5.2.
5.2?
You use 5.2? Okay. All right.
Only in my light beers, though.
All right. I wasn't even going to talk about 5.2, but maybe we can kind of discuss that later. But anyway, I figured tonight was the perfect night. Since tonight is Letterman's last show, I figured I'd do the top 10 reasons to mess with your brewing water. Right? So, first of all, you can fly your Beer Geek flag. That's a good reason, right? Finally apply that chemistry class. I know mine was back in the 70s, so you know that was a little hazy. Break through your fear. Okay? Because I think a lot of people have maybe picked up the water book down at Trevor's shop and kind of paged through it and said, oh, I'm not doing that. You'll realize it's not that hard if you take a look at some of the other resources that we'll go through tonight. And what it'll do for you is you'll get stronger fermentations, you'll get better mash efficiency, you'll cater to yourself flavor-wise. Okay? So you're already doing the gypsum thing, you must like the IPAs to get that bitterness. That's one of the things we'll talk about too. Then you can optimize your flavors by the style that you're brewing. And of course, number 2 would be make better beer. But that one deserves number 1 as well. Make better beer. So, going to dive into the chemistry. Believe me, you may not even think 99 was appropriate when you see what I've got. Anybody see this before? So is this the stuff of nightmares? Oh, the chance to fly your flag. So, atoms. I think everybody kind of has an idea of what atoms are. There's a nucleus, there's protons and neutrons, right? Neutrons have neutral charges, protons are positive charges. And then there's these electron shells around the outside. Is any of this vaguely familiar from way back when?
It's taking me back to high school.
Yeah, and any of those shells that are not completely filled are more reactive because the shell isn't filled and all these things happen. Okay? So the full shells are much more stable, while the partially full shells are more reactive. Okay? That's about as deep as we're going to go. Molecules are just collections of atoms that are put together. Okay? So the brewing salts that you use, for instance, calcium sulfate, gypsum, it's a brewing salt. And those are just molecules put together of these different pieces. Okay? The big thing in brewing are the ions. These are atoms that have either lost one of their electrons around the outside, in this case, and become positive because there's more positive charge on it than negative charge. Or they gather an extra electron around the outside, so they're negatively charged. Okay? So some of the other terms that you'll see, and you'll see this in a lot of the water spreadsheets, anions and cations. Anions are the ones that are negative in charge. Cations are the ones that are positively charged. And this is the little mnemonic I finally gave myself as a way to remember which one's which. Anytime there's two things that you got to keep straight, I still struggle with alpha and beta amylase, cations and anions. The T looks like a positive to me. Okay, so that's how I remember that one. I take the science seriously, but a little levity can make it more appealing. I hope. There is a question mark. You may not think so. So let's talk about pH really quickly. This is just simply a measure of how acidic or alkaline a solution is. Okay? This is an example of the pH scale. Pure water is right down here in the middle with a pH of 7. Most of our tap water is going to be somewhere up around here in the 8. I think when I usually measure mine out at the plant, it's like 8.2, somewhere in there. And various other things are on here too. Sodium hydroxide, of course, is very alkaline and basic. Hydrochloric acid or battery acid way down here on the other end, on the acidic side. Okay? So,
You don't have beer listed.
actually, oh, you know what? There is no beer listed on there. Where did I get this one? Well, anyway, most beers are going to be down here. Will, what do you usually get on yours? 4.2? Yeah. After you go through all the fermentation and everything, they'll often be down in here in the low 4s. And we'll talk some more about other pH levels at the different stages. How many of you actually do measure pH on any of your mashes?
I've done it just with the little, the little sticks,
Okay.
but you're saying 7's water and I'm reading like 6, so that's probably not that far
Okay.
off.
Yeah, those are really kind of tough to read.
Yeah.
They get much resolution. I finally actually bought one for home too, and I'll show you that one as well as the one I use at the plant. So this might bring back some nightmares. So the pH, the number itself, this is the math behind it. The bracket expression is the concentration. That's how they write concentration in chemical terms. So it's the concentration of the hydrogen ions. They've lost their electrons, so they're positively charged. And then you're just measuring how many of them there are in concentration and taking the negative log of that. Okay, so if you remember some math, if I come down here to the 7, the concentration is 1 times 10 to the 7 minus 7 moles per liter. Okay? Moles is a chemical measure, which we'll talk about in a second. So really, all you're doing here to get that number is if I take the log of this number, the logarithm to the base 10 of that is -7. And if I multiply that by -1, it's 7. Okay? So that's the whole magic behind that number. It's just merely measuring the concentration of the hydronium ions, I should say. So, mole, this was fun. I was looking for some things that I could put in here on the web. So, of course, I found a whole bunch of these guys. And that's not the one I was looking for. And then there was mole, which I absolutely
delicious.
love. Right? And then finally down on number 5 definition, here it is, the mole. And essentially what this is, it's just the number of atoms in a given quantity. And anybody remember Avogadro's number? Remember that? Chemistry class? Anyway, it's 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd, so it's a big boatload of atoms, okay? And if you get into any of those water books where they're actually doing the chemistry, like the Palmer and Kaminsky one, you'll be working in milliequivalents, which is related to mole weights and all this. I'm not going there tonight. We're going to go much simpler. So, do a little brewing chemistry. I love this. This is like my current new favorite book. This is Randy Mosier's Mastering Homebrew. Anybody have that yet? I love this. There are two extremes of water treatment. You can dive in deeply and recreate classic brewing waters down to the last molecule, measure every batch minute by minute with a pH meter, and generally geek out over water. I would say that if that's your idea of fun, by all means go for it. But for most of us, just a little consideration of your water chemistry will yield great results. And his chapter in this book on water is called Water Without Tears. And it's now my favorite chapter on water chemistry for brewing. So, Trevor, you better stock up.
Did you carry that one, Trevor?
I haven't heard of it yet.
So, on this water business, water is like a universal solvent. It's one of the most powerful solvents there is. It's a very polar molecule, so when you've got those charged ions together that form a salt, the water is very polar and it goes in there and it aligns with the charges and splits those things apart. And it does that very, very well. And that's how you get all this minerally water that you get in the various places you draw water from, okay? Depending on what the geography is around the area where the water's coming from. All that water runs down through all these different rocks and dissolves the things that are dissolvable, and they go into solution, and that's where all that comes from, right? So if you think of Burton water, I mean, there is a whole pile of stuff in that because it's run down through all these mineral deposits and it's dissolved all that. We, on the other hand, here in Western Washington, have very soft water. There's not a lot of stuff in there. Now, these components can all have flavors of their own, but the most important thing about them from the brewing standpoint is that they affect the mash chemistry and the pH. So, here's Mosier's Big Six. I'm going to refer to that book a lot. I absolutely love it. Will brought his copy into work one day, and after I saw it, I ordered it immediately. So I'd highly recommend you check this one out. But Mosier's Big Six are these ions here. The cations are the calcium, and that one is the one we usually run into, is the 2+. It's short 2 electrons, so it has a charge of +2. Magnesium is just like it in that it has a +2 as well. Sodium is just a +1. The anions on the other side are bicarbonate, and the bicarbonate is the main thing that they're talking about when they talk about the alkalinity of your water. Okay? This is, the concentration of this is the main term in the alkalinity. Okay, and it can also be calculated from calcium and magnesium. We're not going to do a lot of equations tonight, so we'll leave that out. The sulfate, well, you might notice here, these ions are actually molecular, right? These are just a single element, where these are combinations, hydrogen, carbon, and 3 oxygens together. But that group still floats together and it still has a negative charge. Okay? Sulfate, same way. 1 sulfur and 4 oxygens, -2 charge on that group. And then, of course, the chloride is -1. Okay? So these are kind of the 6 most important ones in the brewing that have the most effects. And here's just a breakdown on what they each do. Calcium will tend to acidify your water a little bit. It will help enhance your enzyme action in your mash. Helps runoff, stability, and even some clarification issues. And when you look at hardness of water, that calcium is the main player in that. Calcium and magnesium are the two things that are used to calculate the hardness. Okay? Magnesium has similar effects. It acidifies, but it's real easy to get too much of that going, and it wrecks the flavor of your beer. It makes this really unpleasant bitterness flavor. And I had been doing some water chemistry stuff, and Will Kemper came down to our plant to visit, and I got to talking with him about that, and I showed him I added Epsom salts, which is magnesium sulfate, to one of my brews, and he said, don't do that. Never add any magnesium. He said there's enough of that in the malt, you don't need to add any, because the high side risk of it is too big. Okay? It just creates this really unpleasant bitterness. So sodium, it has little effect in the mash, but in moderate levels it adds some fullness, especially in darker beers. One of the things I'll show on some that I brewed, like if I do a stout, for instance, I will add some baking soda, which is sodium bicarbonate, and that goes in, and it adds that fullness. It can also enhance sweetness a little bit when you get that in there. But again, like everything in excess, it's unpleasant. Now the bicarbonate is strongly alkaline, okay? And this will actually redden some of your pale beers, so you get a little bit of that redness. And it does emphasize bitterness, but it does it very harshly. That's why typically the brews that have a lot of that in it are the darker ones that are more malty rather than the ones that are hoppy. Okay? Because it really brings out that bitterness, but it makes it harsh. Okay? So, like I said, best in lightly hopped and dark beers. Okay? The sulfate, good for pale and dry beers, and it enhances the hop flavor and sharpens the hop bitterness. Okay? Chloride, now this is not chlorine, I will talk about chlorine in a minute. Chloride is the ion, that's the Cl-1. Okay? Chlorine is actually molecular chlorine that they use at water treatment plants to clear the water. Okay? This sulfate to chloride ratio, has anybody battered this around and talked about this? There's a lot of mixed opinion about whether this is really important or not, and at low levels it really doesn't make any difference. But the ratio of the sulfate concentration to the chloride ratio can affect how a beer will be perceived. So if your ratio, the sulfate being the one on the top of the ratio, is twice what the chloride is, you'll be up here and you'll be getting bitterness and even more bitter. So this is where, if you're doing the IPA, you probably want to lean over here toward this side. But if you're doing something more malty, you want to get that balance down on this side. Okay? If you read a lot of the stuff that's out there, some people think this is really important. They really focus on that. And others think it just doesn't make that much of a difference. But, did anybody read Palmer and Kaminsky's book, The Water Book? Yeah. Did you see that little experiment that they said to do?
Not yet.
They said take gypsum, mix it up in some water with a known amount, so you have the concentration, and take calcium chloride and mix that up in some water. Then pour yourself 3 glasses of the same beer and pollute them, experimenting at these different ratios. Now, it's not exactly the same chemistry as what goes on if you put it all in the mash and you have things going on, but we did this out at the plant, and you could definitely tell some differences. And I don't think any of us, Will, do you remember doing that? Yeah. I don't think any of us thought bitter and malty were the two ends of the spectrum. I don't know, one just tasted minerally and the other one not so much, and the one in the middle is like, yeah,
I could drink.
doesn't have any off flavor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. It might be worth doing that sometime if you're gonna be playing around with those and just mess around with it. I mean, it's just a fun little
Do you like
experiment.
that book, that water book, that poem?
You know, out of those 4 books of the ingredients, that's my least favorite of the 4.
Really?
There's a lot of good stuff in there, but for some reason, I feel like they sort of made it more complicated than it is.
They gotta take up 300 pages or whatever.
Yeah.
Make it too simple.
Like, because it's one of those ones where you try to read it just to understand something, and then you start reading and I'm like, oh my god, I think I'm gonna go to sleep.
Well,
I use it as a reference. I don't actually try to like actually read it because it does. It's so dry, what you right to sleep.
What does more sulfate taste like? More bitter?
um,
It says, right?
allegedly, it's more bitter. When we did it, I did not get a lot of difference. I think my best description, this one sort of tasted powdery. I don't know if that's a real technical beer term. It just,
It's granular?
yeah, well it is. I mean, it's gypsum, right? That I put in there, and I just didn't care for the flavor. The chloride, the high end of the chloride didn't really do a lot for me either. You know, and malty was not the thing that came to mind. So, but I think
But
if
you
you
did
put it in the proper beer, this was all done with our blonde ale, right? Our test brew. So very simple smash beer, low hopping rates and all that. So we should probably do that again sometime with some more appropriate beers, like pollute an IPA, for instance, and pollute a nice dark stout or something, and see how that flavor thing plays.
I have a question when you talked about putting the powder into it, was baking powder? Or-
In this case, it was gypsum for the sulfate, and
the baking soda on the last slide.
Yep.
What's considered too much? Like when you're using that, how much would you use per batch?
we'll talk about that when I get into some of those spreadsheets and show you some of that, because I'll actually show you what I was adding. And I'll show you how to calculate that out, or to use somebody's spreadsheet to do it.
There you go.
So, some other elements in the water. Lead is a bad actor. It's toxic to both us and yeast. Iron is a really bad actor. I came from the Midwest back in the early 80s, and I had just horrible water. It had iron and all kinds of crap in it. It had a water softener, so then after it goes through the water softener, it's loaded with sodium after that. And I wasn't brewing back then, and I'm glad, because it was a real hassle compared to living out here. You know, the other thing you might see on a water report are nitrate and nitrite. Those are both good indicators of polluted water, and you're not likely to see that here. With the water coming from our PUVs, it's really almost too clean for some beers. Some other elements that are desirable at low levels, copper. In the old days, they used to call the boil kettle a copper because it was made out of copper, so they were getting lots of copper. A couple of the books I've read suggest throwing a couple pennies in your boil and just let it go with the boil, and that's all the copper you need is what comes off that.
Pennies mostly sake.
What's that?
Now they are.
Now they are.
Yeah.
Gotta get old pennies.
1983 or prior.
And a little bit of zinc is a good thing too, right? That's actually a yeast nutrient at low levels, and I use yeast nutrient on everything I own. So that's where I get my zinc. So let's go to these two bad boys here. We got to put this stuff in the water system to disinfect it, okay? And it's both chlorine and chloramine. These are both highly toxic to yeast, and they can create some nasty chlorophenol off flavors. Okay, if you're doing something like a Dunkelweizen or something, and you want the clove ester thing going on, a little chlorophenol's okay, but a whole bunch is just not tasty. Okay? And that's, if you leave those in your water, those can start raising their ugly head in the flavor. Carbon filtration, if you go very slowly, will take out chlorine and some of the chloramine if you go slow enough. Okay? But it's really not the best solution. Boiling will remove the chlorine, so a lot of people are doing it, just boil their whole batch of water and let it boil for a while and then cool it back down and brew with it. That'll drive off the chlorine, but it doesn't remove the chlorine. Okay? A great solution to this is the Campton tablets. Have anybody used those?
Yeah.
They're absolutely great. When you go to buy them, make sure you read the label and get the potassium metabisulfite and not the sodium metabisulfite. They're both used the same way in wines and stuff, but the potassium is less likely to cause some off flavor issues, and especially when you're using some other additions that might have sodium in them. Okay? So, and the dosage on that is about 1 tab for 20 gallons.
What else you use 1 tab and 5 gallons?
You can do that. You know, you'll get some extra sulfite in there and some extra potassium. I've gone as far. We have a little free chlorine and chloramine test kit at the plant, and at one time they must have done something at the reservoir to disinfect, and they just put a big glug of this stuff in. And the water that came through, I usually drop 1 tab in 14 gallons and it clears instantly. But that one day I put 1 tab in and the color did not change at all on the test. 2 tabs and it was lighter pink, but it was still pink. And it took 3 tabs to clear it. So there are some things that happen where they make some additions to the water throughout the season. But the nice thing about the chlorine is you can usually smell it, right? If you take a good deep whiff of that water, you'll smell it if it's in there. So, how's your water? Let's talk about that. Thought I'd show you this map. So down here, this is the concentration of hardness as calcium carbonate in milligrams per liter. Okay. The other way you might see this expressed is as ppm, which is parts per million. Those are actually very close to the same thing. A PhD chemist will want to get an argument about it, that they're not exactly the same, but any normal person, they're very much the same thing. Because a milligram is 1/1000th of a gram in a liter. Right? So that's parts per million. Okay? Because the water weight, of course, is 1. So anyway, if you look around the country, we're up here in one of these deep blue ones, only 0 to 60 milligrams per liter on the water that we can draw from. You know, as you move east here, you're getting up into a little more, 61 to 120. So here's us, great brewing water. I used to live in Illinois, hard brewing water. Okay? So I had a water softener, and brewing would not have been fun. I'd have been buying a bottle of water back there. It was too much of a hassle. The other great thing out here in our area is you got Skagit Valley Malt. And of course, back in Illinois, we had Underwood. So, speaking of commercials, you know this guy? Our cohort Wayne did this commercial. We have our own most interesting man. I don't always brew my own beer, but when I do, I use malt from Skagit Valley. Stay malty, my friends. So, how's your water? Okay, I I've tried several times to go down and get a listing of all those brewing ions from the Skagit PUD. I have yet to actually go down to the office and stand there and keep asking to talk to someone else until I get a real chemist. I get the standard report that they hand me, and the only thing that's on it is the levels of all these regulated contaminants that by law they have to track.
Right.
So they don't want to spend lab money on this other stuff if they really don't have to. But I'm kind of thinking if enough of us ask.
We just need to recruit one of the chemists to be a brewer.
Well, I thought about going down there with a couple of six-packs. So you guys got a chemist here? The other big one is Ward Labs. They're in Nebraska, and they've got these different test kits available. The kit, you log on to their website, you buy this kit, they ship you a box with the sample bottles in it, and you just put your water in it, you put it back in the box, put the shipping label that they provide, drop it at UPS or whatever, and as soon as they get it, within 24 hours you'll get your results back in the email. And they have a couple of different versions. There's a bunch of other ones, but this one, these three are kind of for brewers and household things. But this brewer's test here, sodium, calcium, magnesium, I mean, the top six are Mosier's Magic 6, right? And then some of the other ones like iron and nitrate, total dissolved solids, pH, blah, blah, blah. Okay, there's also a household one, which looks very similar to this. I guess I haven't really looked at what the difference is. It looks like most of the same things.
Fluoride. Oh, never mind. No, bigger than that.
Ah,
Fluoride.
oh, okay. No, yeah, fluoride. Okay. And then there's this other W6 household one. But anyway, here's their latest price list as of what, last night when I grabbed this screenshot. So the brewer's one is $42, the household is $42, and the household W6 one is just $33.35. So if you're really desperate to know if you're working on well water or something like that and you're not getting PUD water, you might be interested in doing this. Now we have a local lab here in Burlington. One of our partners at Skagit Valley Malting is friends with a guy who works there, and I've been meaning to go over there and say, hey, would you guys take a look at this Ward Laboratory site and see if you'd like to offer something like this to all the local brewers? And I might fudge the prices and make them even lower than Ward's when I show it to them, and see if they're willing to do that.
Or match the price and then you don't have to pay shipping, so it would still be cheaper.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Now the downside to theirs is we had some other work done from them just recently, and it's like a 2-week wait to get your results back, where Ward knocks them out immediately. Now, this is another thing. Anybody seen this on any of the websites? This little Vermont test kit. You can buy it with or without an included pH meter. The testing on it, most of the tests are good for about a resolution of 10 ppm. Okay, so when I do my little titration, I know I have somewhere between 40 and 50 parts per million calcium. I don't know if it's 42.6 or 45, or it's just 10 ppm resolution. So it's not great, but it's certainly good enough for what we're doing. Right? We're just making beer. Now the sulfate test is only 50 ppm resolution. So that one's a lot tougher. You mix up some stuff in this test tube here, and then it gets cloudy, and then you compare it to these different targets and see which of the cloudiness ones is the closest one. So, you know, it still gives you some idea. But when I do our water locally, there's never anything in it until I add my gypsum. And then it comes up to 50-ish. And we'll run through some of that. The test kit, I think it's somewhere around like $110, something like that. And there's enough reagent in there to do 50 water tests. Okay? The one thing I will say is kind of a pain on this are the expiration dates. Every one of those little reagent bottles has a different shelf life, and I've got a little spreadsheet to track how old each one is and if it's expired. And then, you know, you go out to buy one bottle of solution B for the chloride test, and it's like costs almost as much as buying the whole kit over again. And then the one time we finally did go and replace one of them, I got it and it had the same date on it as the one I was replacing. So I don't know what the answer to this is. It's a great little test though, it's really quick. Takes about 10 minutes to run through the whole thing and you've got all those burn lines. Measuring pH.
pH is really affected by temperature, isn't it?
Definitely. Yeah, in fact, at mash temperature, it's somewhere around, what, 0.35 pH points higher at mash temperature than at room temperature. So, the paper tests are one way to go. I don't know what your experience was with it. I found them hard to read, especially if you're doing a dark beer. Right, you dip it in there and what's the color of the paper?
The colors is too, like, I don't know, just.
Yeah. So the meters are probably the way to go. If you're going to go this far and you're going to start measuring pH and you're really geeking out on water, it's probably worth getting one. Two things to look for if you're looking for a pH meter are resolution and accuracy. Okay? Resolution is what can you actually read on the meter, and accuracy is how close to the real value is the number you get. Okay? So they come in different flavors that way, and different accuracy and different resolution. Prices can be anywhere from $35 and up. And I mean really up for the lab grade ones. Okay? Like in the thousands. Okay? Trevor, you've got the one, what's the one you have?
Checker?
Yeah, he's got the pH checker from Oakton.
No.
Anna.
Anna. Yeah. How much is that one?
It's $40.
40 bucks. So that can get you into it pretty easily. A lot of them will have temperature measurement and temperature compensation as well, because there's a big difference at different temperatures. But I will tell you, even if you have a temperature corrected one or compensated one, don't measure hot water. Okay? You'll ruin that probe very quickly, and those are 50 to 60 bucks to replace the probe alone.
Wait, on the piece of equipment that was only 40 bucks, it cost
Yes.
you 60 bucks to replace the part?
Stupid.
So you buy.
Actually, I don't know how much it is to replace the, I don't think you can replace the probe on that one.
You can on the checker, but it's the same scenario. It's like
You guys will buy a new one, yeah.
Yeah, so don't measure hot work, and then you don't have to worry about doing the temperature correction and all that stuff. Just let it get down to room temperature and then measure it. So you can actually have a little ice bath there, take your sample, set it in there, and let it come down to room temp. These are 2 meters that I use. I have this one at home. It was the Milwaukee 102. It was about $100. It does both pH and temperature. The accuracy on it is only plus or minus 0.05, but the resolution is 0.01. So when I read it, it'll say 4.7, for instance. But the accuracy on that means, well, it's 4.7 plus or minus 0.05. Okay? Even though it reads to a finer resolution. This one that we have at the plant is pH, temperature, and conductivity all together. It's got the 05 accuracy as well, but its resolution is only 0.1. Okay? So when I take that measurement, for instance, when I do our mini mashes for a malt, I'll be getting values 5.9, 5.8, 5.9, 5.8, which means it's probably 5.85.
Isn't that coming about a battery tester at Harbor Freight? Weird things like that. No?
What's that?
Some guy told me about a battery tester at Harbor Freight that you use to test pH grade, something like that.
if you were to dig up the equations, you could possibly do that because the brain of this thing is nothing more than a really sensitive voltmeter.
Yeah.
Because you're measuring potential when you put that probe in there. There's an electric potential between the solution you're measuring and the stuff inside the tube and the probe.
Yeah,
So-
that's the electrolyte.
Yep.
Battery testers, I've seen have floating balls or their refractometer. Must be something different.
And hydrometers too, that float inside of the tube, you take the panels to it, it's all kinds of ways.
Simple approach and beyond. So, simple approach, if you're extract brewing, just get rid of the chlorine and chloramine. Campton tab or part of a Campton tab if you're doing 5 gallons, or even use filtration, but again, you won't get both of these completely out unless you filter very, very slowly. So throw in part of a Campton tab, a third of one for 5 gallons or something, and it just will take care of all that. So if you're all grain brewer, use the Campton tabs again, add a little calcium chloride and a little bit of gypsum. And I'll show you some quick parts per million calculations for that on this page.
Can
And
you go
this-
back- Can you go back, please? I'll take
Sure.
this. Okay, I got it.
Okay, so here's some additives, and I don't expect you to remember this. You know, there's books, there's websites, there's these spreadsheets I'll show you. But here are the different additions: calcium sulfate, also called gypsum; magnesium sulfate or Epsom salt, which after Will Kemper chided me, I threw mine away. Don't use it anymore. So stay away from that one. Too much of a up-end risk.
How about iodine in table salt? Does that make
Yeah, that's a good point, and I did not have that in here. I'm glad you brought that up. Do not use iodized table salt if you're going to use table salt as one of your additions. And then the calcium chloride, which is actually calcium chloride dihydrate. There's actually 2 water molecules attached to the calcium chloride. And that's how you buy it from Trevor. He has to always go back and get mine for me, because he had it hidden in the back until last week. So.
It's right there next to the gypsum.
But if I add 1 gram of the calcium sulfite or sulfate, not fight, sulfate to 1 gallon of water, I get 62 parts per million calcium addition and 147 parts per million of sulfate.
That's distilled water, obviously, like pure water with nothing.
Actually, any water. If your water, for instance, my water at the plant usually has about 5 ppm of calcium when I start. If I were to add 1 gram per gallon of this stuff, then I would have 67
Sure.
ppm of calcium. Okay, because I'm adding 62. And then usually my sulfate is nil on the Lamont test, so I'd be adding 147
Yeah.
ppm.
That's what you're at.
Yeah. And if you like grams per liter, that's over on this side. Okay? And a table sort of like this is in Moyer's book too. So. And it's in the water book, and you can do this in software and spreadsheets and all that. You know, you want to ramp it up, you can start doing all these historical profiles. I have not messed with that much. I've been focusing more on just trying to tweak the chemistry for the style I'm brewing. You know, you can get those color and flavor-based profiles too and mess with those. I'm going to kind of go through these in reverse order of how much I like them. So, the tools, I started out with Palmer's Nomograph, which was this thing. This was in the back cover of How to Brew 3rd edition, or I think the one that's free online, the 1st edition, doesn't have the colored part up here. But I'll show you how to use that in a second, but I just thought I'd show you really quickly Palmer's spreadsheet. He's got a spreadsheet where you can put in, here's the one thing that I still use this for. Up here you can select your style. Okay, so an American Light Lager is what's styled now. Let's go down here and do, let's do a Dortmunder Export. So now that'll give you some suggested levels for your big 6 on here. So then, if you use his, you can go down here and put your initial water, what it's at, and calculate your additions and figure all that stuff out. I'm not going to spend much time on this because I don't like this one, okay? And Will doesn't either.
And you don't like it because,
It doesn't work as well as brewing water. And I'm gonna show you brewing water too, so we'll get to that here. So, but that's kind of nice, it has those things. But has anybody tried to use this thing? No? Well, if you do decide you want to dig that book out and try this, here's how it works. You take this chart and you get your water chemistry. So this is what we had for Burlington. I've got 1.2 ppm of magnesium, 5.4 ppm of calcium, and depending on your water report, your alkalinity will be either reported as alkalinity as calcium carbonate or as bicarbonate, okay? And you can calculate between the two just by using this little nomograph here, because this scale is ppm of HCO3, this one's ppm of calcium carbonate. Okay, so ours is either 21 on this scale or 25.6 on this. So I draw a line here first between my magnesium and my calcium content, see where it intersects my effective hardness, and then take this point, either this one or this one, which are the same point on the scale, and draw a line from there up through there, up to my pH scale and my color range. So in this case, that water as is probably good for brewing a beer somewhere in this color range, right about in there. What I find is wrong about this is his pH scale. I think he has this backwards. So I don't use this anymore either. But we'll show you brewing water. But if you do play with this, instead of 5.6 to 6.1, this should be 5.2 up to 5.6-ish, something like that. Because that's measured at room temperature. And he has this change down here. So that's why I went away from this. But using his spreadsheet, this is where I got these zones for my minerals and my pH based on what he had for the style. So I was doing an Irish red. So this is where I wanted to be. Okay? So I also knew I wanted to have about at least 50 ppm of calcium, so I made these additions. Okay, this is obviously before my discussion with Will Kemper, because I got the Epsom salts in there, and don't do that anymore. But I also added some baking soda to get my pH up a little higher, because I wanted a little higher color on it. Okay? So here's another one. This is our base malt test brew that I think you had when you were visiting us. And same kind of exercise. The nice thing about these nomographs, by the way, which is kind of a dying art, they're ways of doing all this complex calculation just graphically. And it's a dying art because everybody has computers now. You can just put the equation in Excel or something and do it. But I always thought these were really elegant. And the last book published on how to build these nomographs is from the early 40s. And they want $500 for a copy of it. Yeah.
It's nice because they're so visual.
Yes, yeah. And what I did with this is I laminated one of these and I used an erasable marker to do my calculations.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So Beersmith, how many of you use Beersmith? Okay. I have to tell you, I think Beersmith was the best $25 I ever spent on it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it, and every update that comes out, it gets better. But let me show you,
Yeah.
you know, I highly encourage you, go get the free copy and play. If you don't already have it, get the free copy and play with it for a while, and I'm sure you're going to want to send Brad a 20,
Oh, yeah.
because it's great. Let me just show you the water tool. I mean, there's all kinds of tools in here, all kinds of calculators for units and blah, blah, blah. But the water tool itself starts out like this. You can choose your base profile, okay? So in this case, I had my big water report from Burlington in there, right? From Edge Laboratories. So this is what was in my water, okay? Now I can go down here and look at these different salts and put something in there. So, and then this was my target. This is another nice thing about this. There's target profiles. So you can go in there and select the target profile. I made these top two up out of that spreadsheet from Palmer by style. So let's just put the blonde ale one in there. So here's where I want my water to be. Here's where it is now. I have no additions yet. And here are my actual total. And this is the difference between where I'm at and where I wanted to be. Okay? So I can go in here and say, oh, let's see, for 8 gallons, what if I put in 5 grams of gypsum and, I don't know, 4.5 grams of calcium chloride, and it calculates out those ppms here for you, adds them all up, and gives you the difference in the water. Okay? So, nice tool. The other thing that Brad has in here, he uses a solver to go in and calculate the best additions for you. So you can go down here and click on this guy, and what it does is it goes through and tweaks all 6 of those things until it can get the closest to this as it can get.
You gotta put a style in for it though, right?
Yeah.
Well, you gotta have some target profile that
Yeah.
you're going for, because it tries to get to this, and it tweaks these, whatever it has to do to get as close to this as possible.
Quick question on scheduled PUD water. I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but every August I notice when the algae bloom's going on in Judy Reservoir, the water starts tasting like crap. Does that change all those numbers?
The big one that it probably changes is the chlorine. Okay? This is the chloride. This is actually the ion. So it won't change this, but what it may change is the amount of Campton tab you need to get that out of there. So that's Beersmith. I mean, from the recipe standpoint, if you've never played with Beersmith, you gotta go do that. I mean, it's just a really nice package. So, now this is the one, if you don't do this, don't mess with your water at all, okay? Brengard's thing is so cool. He has a free version. You don't have to pay anything. Just go to his website, Brew and Water, and grab the free version and you can play with it. If you make a donation to him through PayPal, then you'll get all the updates and the latest and greatest and so forth. And how many of you read Homebrew Talk? Martin's a big contributor there, and you know how when you read those things, you can kind of get the first couple sentences and you go, huh, here's a self-appointed expert that doesn't know anything, and here's a guy that really knows something. Martin's in the second group. Okay? So I read almost everything he's posted, and I ended up donating, I think, $10 to him, and I get all the updates for his spreadsheet. He's actually got a 25-year career behind him in water resources management. Okay? So he's really done a lot of stuff. And he's also a BJCP national judge and a medal-winning home brewer. Okay? So he's one of our guys. So let me just show you a couple of these really quickly. First of all, I'm going to go to sheet 0, which is the instructions. I will tell you this page right here in Excel, I want to say it kind of nicely. No, I'm not going to say it nicely. This page right here is worth more than the water book. Because as you go down through this thing, all this water knowledge that's in here, I mean, this thing scrolls down forever, okay? This is the instructions, and I guess I'm on the wrong one to show you the water knowledge, but here's the water knowledge one. This one is huge, and it talks all about water and how all the different things apply to brewing and blah, blah, blah. just go get this, it's free. And play around with it. And there's a learning curve, okay? I mean, when you read the instructions, this thing is a little complex, but you know, you can go in here and input your water report format, and that's all in there for you. And then you can go in here and it calculates whether you need to acidify your sparge water and all this stuff. But the water adjustment itself is just really fairly simple. You can put in the amount of mash water, sparge water, and what additions you're making, and see what effect they have. Existing water profile, and it has this choice up here for what color of beer and what flavor profile you want. So for instance, a yellow balanced, which is what I do with that blonde ale, is right there. So that's the chemistry I'm aiming for, and you can crank through that thing. Okay? So that's that one. And I have some ones here, you know, in the interest of time, I'm just going to move on from these. But I have one in there for the dry style, which shows the baking soda addition and so forth, and all the stuff you can do with that. So, further study, here's my current favorites on this topic, right? If I come visit you next month at your meeting and nobody's done this yet, I'm going to be really disappointed. Get this, it's free for starters. Mastering Homebrew by Mosier is a great one, and then Palmer's How to Brew, of course. I think a lot of you probably have that one. And then Kaminsky and Palmer's Water. And the other one, I talked about those people on Homebrew Talk. A.J. DeLange is another one. If you want to go read stuff about water and get way deep, AJ's stuff is all posted on Homebrew Talk. So he's a good one too. Okay? So, we're going to wrap it up here with some sound advice. Okay? This is a, yes?
Before you get there, could you scroll back a couple pages and put up the analysis of the scheduled PUD water, so I'm copying that down?
Picture of smartphone.
Yeah.
That'll work.
Here, how about this one?
On the website.
Yeah, this is actually our Burlington water. It's 1.2 ppm of magnesium, 5.4
Say it again,
calcium.
please. I want to write that down. I've been waiting for information on the chemistry and on water over here.
Okay.
Can we just get a copy of the presentation?
I don't want to give you a copy of the presentation because I've used some copyrighted stuff with people. And as long as I show it, it's like going to the web, right? But I don't want to give a copy of it. I will give you the water data that I have though.
Oh, that'd be perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you want to email me? It's brock@skagitValleyMalting.com. And I'll just send you, I won't send you the big water report, but I will send you the brewing ions that I find at our place. And I do check that periodically with that little mock kit too. Okay. So, back in the 30s, I think there was Cole Porter, the composer. Not Cole Porter, the beer from Atlantic Brewing. And he wrote this song called Experiment. And this is the advice that I leave you with on this water business. Experiment. Oh, here's my sound.
Sing to us, Bob.
Oh,
Hit the
believe me,
speakers.
you do not want that to happen. Oh, did we turn those off?
I got one here, I turned it off.
All right, let's try this again.
What we need is portals, the art of a mortal. There's just one final message I would give to you. We all have learned reliance on the sacred teachings of science. So I will remind you, you never will decline, in spite of Philistine defiance. To do what all good scientists do. Experiment. Make it your motto there. Experiment. And it
close that.
Bill's really tired of listening to me hum that long.
Thanks for not singing it.